Hello and good morning. I'm Leonardo McClarty, president of the Howard County Chamber, and like to welcome each of you to what we've coined Coffee and Candidates. And so this is something that the Howard County Chamber has started during this election season, where we are talking with our candidates for public office. We're going to be talking with candidates for county council, and then also we'll be talking to General Assembly candidates, particularly once the primaries are over. What we have elected to do is to talk to those candidates, particularly in cases where the races there you have multiple candidates, maybe either on the Democratic side as well as the Republican side, or in some instances, if the primary will ultimately decide who is the elected person in the fall. And so we're excited to talk about District 4 this morning. And so we have with us Hank Boyd as well as Jensen Evelyn. And also want to say that invitation was extended to current council member Deb Young, who politely declined to participate. She felt that at this particular time, there were some things taking place campaign wise that she expressed some dissatisfaction with, but felt like her record stood for itself, and that was her words to me. And so wanted to relay that on to everyone here, but just know that she was invited. The thing that I'm also conscious to make sure that everyone knows is that the chamber does not endorse candidates. Certainly, as time prevails, we will take positions on policies, but we don't take positions on people. And so wanted to just put that disclaimer out. And so without further ado, it's going to be enough talking for me. I'll ultimately be posing questions as time progresses, but want to allow our candidates to introduce themselves. And also for those of you that are watching and perhaps are unclear on some of the districts in the county, the two areas that I would say that most people are particularly knowledgeable of as it relates to District 4 is certainly going to be the downtown Columbia area. And then certainly as you start moving down 29 going into the Maple Lawn area. And so I think at this point, I'm sure you have seen signs in those areas, as well as if you travel down Cedar Lane Road as you go towards Robinson Nature Center and over by the hospital and the community college and so forth. But that's just to give you just a really quick insight as to the district in terms of maybe some key landmark areas. And so with that, I'm going to now shift and allow Hank Boyd to introduce himself to the group and just share with us why you're running for council, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Well, first, I'd like to thank the Howard County Chamber of Commerce. I think this is a great forum, so I love it. Coffee and candidates, the way to do it. My background is I am an educator. I'm at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. I teach marketing, so I understand business, and I appreciate what you're trying to do to affect change in the community. Now, it's a great question you pose. Why am I running? You're an educator. What? A nice guy. What are you doing in the middle of all this? All right. November 3rd, 2021 will be indelible in my mind. It's something that really I found troubling because it didn't happen to me. It happened to my daughter. She attends middle school, and on that particular day, she's going to leave a note for a friend. And what does she find on her locker? But the N-word is scrawled on her locker. My wife and I are appalled. It's Howard County. We're progressive. We're better than this. So immediately we jump in. We talk with the principals. We work it all the way up to the superintendent of schools. And we said, what exactly transpired in terms of your policy? Because you have cameras, you claim you want to catch this person. And yet what happened, their policy is we took a picture, we cleaned it up immediately. And the minute where I heard that, I was like, wait a minute, you took a crime scene and you basically erased the crime scene. You're not going to catch the perpetrator. You need to change your policy. And that's where it began. The school dug in their heels. They're like, no, we have our policy. This is the way we want to handle things. And I said, Hank, you've got a lot of education. You're a professor, you're a lawyer. Are you going to do something? Are you going to sit on the sidelines, or are you going to get into the arena? So I got in the arena and said that county council is where the power resides. You can draft laws and you can put real teeth in those laws so we don't have to deal with this nonsense. It is hard to believe that we are so well into the 21st century, marching on into it, and we are still dealing with issues of race. And we have learning environments that aren't necessarily safe for our kids and our students. So what I care about deeply is to have a safe and conducive learning environment. It is something we must have in Howard County. I know we can do better as a nation. And of course, if you watch the news and what's happening in our country, we need to address this now. This is our time. So that's why I got into it. And like I said, we'll see where the road takes us. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we will now move to Jansen.
Thank you very much, Leo. Good morning. Good morning, all. Thank you. Thank you for having me on this. I know it's coffee and conversation, but as I was telling Leo before we hit live, I forgot the coffee part. So give me a few minutes and I'll be back. But I just wanted to quickly introduce myself for those who are not familiar with me. I've obviously worked with the Howard County Chamber of Commerce and in my past professional role I was a assistant chief administrative officer in Howard County government, and I've spent a decade working in local government. But to answer your question specifically, why am I in this race? The primary reason I jumped into this race centers around opportunity for all, specifically with regards to housing, specifically. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll go with Leonardo, specifically with housing, specifically with just economic opportunity. And there was one particular incident that made me realize, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? And it was the new cultural center, or rather the expansion of Toby's Dinner Theater. The incumbent that I had voted for 4 years ago opted to send that into contingency, which is akin to defunding it. And that's been a trend that I've seen throughout this past term with respects to even more recently with the Central Branch relocation, which would have provided so much affordable housing, both in the new relocated location as well as the current existing spot for the Central Branch. So those are the two big catalysts that drove me into this race, because we can no longer afford to be represented by elected officials who are not moved into action by a vision of a more equitable Howard County. We need leadership with vision, experience that embodies the diversity of this wonderful district. As I mentioned, I worked in Howard County for multiple years in the C-suite of 2 different administrations. So I have the experience needed to address the nuts and bolts of local government as it serves a growing population while broadening access and representation. I've lived the successes and the struggles of this community. And so my commitment to the voters of District 4, as well as to all the residents of Howard County, is to bring them all along with me, all of them. I don't just want them at the table. I want them next to me as we chart our path into this exciting new future. We can protect our open spaces. We can build out mass transit opportunities. We can invest in local businesses, and we can make more resilient communities and by focusing on density centers. So I'm not in this race with a huge learning curve. I've been involved in this community way before I decided to run for office. Additionally, my experience, I would humbly and respectfully say there's arguably no one as experienced or qualified to have run for this local office before. So I appreciate your time. I look forward to the questions, and again, pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And so let's stay here in terms of talking about investment and economic development and so forth. And so let's and Jensen, we're going to start with you first this time.
Okay.
And so overall, share your vision for how you might foster an economic environment that leads to job creation and private investment.
Okay, absolutely. So economic development brings new opportunities, improved quality of life by increasing the tax base, which as a resident, the more I increase the commercial tax base, the less I have to worry about taxes being raised with regards to my household. It also increases jobs just from an equity perspective, and it offers needed community revitalization and improvement. And I believe like we are at an inflection point, and it's something I say at the doors all the time. We are at an inflection point. We must continue to encourage redevelopment, including, and I'll go there, the revitalization of our village centers and other destinations in our community. Because I am, as a member of the Howard County Conservancy, above all, I'm concerned about the expansion and the preservation of our green spaces. But I believe that it's not either or, it's and. We can focus on transit-oriented development. And that's the way that, one, it gives more people access to growth opportunities. So on the council, I will work with community stakeholders to explore smart growth opportunities that provide more local businesses, restaurants, and job creators the opportunity to meet demand and compete with the big box chains. In addition, I will proactively support equitable place-making strategies, because I'm not afraid of the fact that this is a growing county, and there's going to have to be more redevelopment. And so we have to ensure that our community benefits from projects that developers will pursue here, including primarily through job creation. Our neighborhood businesses are the heart of our local economy, and we should do everything that we can to help them succeed and play an integral role in continuing to make our community the special place it is. As a member of the council, I'll work with business owners to help break down barriers to entry and increase access to capital workforce development programs. And this is not just empty rhetoric for me. Again, when I worked in the county, in my portfolio was the Office of Procurement and Contract Administration. And that was something to help increase the number of local firms receiving county contracts. I helped to strengthen the local business initiative. I helped ideate and coordinate the very first local business certification workshops and a small business summit. And this is something that we partnered with the Chamber of Commerce for. These free events provided local businesses with assistance through the county's procurement process. And during the time that I dealt and worked closely with procurement, we had 137% growth in the number of businesses registered and certified in the LBI, from 100 to 235 employers. I'm not coming in here just talking empty rhetoric. I know how the world operates. I know how to get things done, and I will bring that experience. I will bring that vision, and I'll bring that boldness to this position.
Thank you, Jensen. And same question to you, Hank, and that is ultimately just share your vision for how you might foster an economic environment that leads to job creation and private investment.
Okay, so right off the bat, I want to go on record. I'm pro-business. Surprise, surprise. I'm a business professor, but at the same time, I have a small business that is housed here in Howard County. I'm a consultant as well. And I understand how difficult it is to launch and run a successful business. So I tip my hat to all the entrepreneurs that are out there. It is quite an arduous journey. And therefore, you're going to find that in my politics, what I tend to be is slightly left of center. So I'm pro-business. I believe that we all should be gainfully employed. And when folks are gainfully employed, good things happen in the community. So now the question becomes, well, how do you help out those entities that are out there that are traditionally been pushed to the margins, right? Some of the smaller players, some of the minority-owned businesses, they have a tough go at it. So we as a community have to step up, and there are things we can do on the council to make it a more conducive environment for business. At the same time, when you're running your business, you want to be free of any of the encumbrances that are out there, excessive taxes or heavy-handed regulations. I'm going to fight tooth and nail to make sure those impediments aren't in your way. You've got to be able to grow your business, which is very important. And what we're going to find is that in this area and the way the market is going, knowledge workers in this information age are key. And we are blessed in Howard County to have amazing school systems, as well as advantages of great institutions like the University of Maryland, where we can draw talent. We want to keep that talent here. We don't want to have a brain drain where people are running away. They say, no, I can stay here in my own backyard and I can make a real meaningful contribution. I have had the pleasure to work with young minds, and these kids really see what's coming down the line for technology. It will be our huge growth center for us. Also in the areas of pharmaceuticals, in terms of new drugs that are going to come out, we can grow that base. There's no reason why Howard County can't be the epicenter for our battle against, I hate to say it, diseases like COVID and the like, but we can make that happen. We have that sort of infrastructure and that talent. So going forward, Howard County will receive more private investment if we do the things that are pro-business, and that should be our focus. And in terms of the overall balance, yes, we can keep our integrity and character, we can keep our green spaces, and we can do this accordingly. Literally, if you can look out my window, I'm right next door to one of the economic powerhouses in this county, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. The talent in that organization is incredible. And you note that their campus keeps expanding. They're getting more opportunities from government. And I would like to see all of us partake in terms of this overall robustness of our economy. So another thing I'll be about is to say that for a lot of the traditionally underrepresented minorities, I want to find mechanisms to get folks jobs in those sorts of entities, especially in the high tech when we talk about growth of areas. And so when we look at it overall, we're saying that, yes, we have a bold vision. We certainly should get there. And we are wealthy for various reasons because we are, once again, Howard County. So the future.
So Hank, thank you. And I guess we're going to stay with you now. And that is, so you shared some of, your thoughts as it relates to, as an example, take APL and some of the others. And so as you think about, again, this business environment, what challenges do you anticipate perhaps coming up long term that will require a different approach than what we've done today?
Okay, so long term, in terms of things we'd have to change. When I look down the horizon, I keep saying to myself, I look at the existing system and I say, where are we falling short? What is happening where you sort of go to these organizations and you say, all right, let's talk about diversity and inclusion. Why is it that at the higher levels, at the upper echelons, it's pretty much all white and you have few folks of color? So long term, to beat this, even though we say, well, look, we all understand diversity and inclusion is important, but we have these biases in the system. I want to have mechanisms to take those biases out. I want to make sure that everyone can rise within the organization if you have the talent. And I think it's incumbent upon us, because we have become more of a majority county in Howard County in the last 10 years. In fact, if you look at our overall population, the white population is just under 50% now. So no longer can we play this game where it's like, okay, well, the plum positions and all the assignments are only going to certain folks that we've always seen traditionally. So we have got to really sit down and say that there have to be these mechanisms. Now, I'm already on record saying that, look, a lot of folks think, look, I'm coming from a good place. I'm not biased. I'm not prejudiced. But if you look at institutions and the way they're built, there are these things that are still there, these legacy elements that cause these problems. And so I would say that if we're going to do things long term, the biggest impediment is to make sure that we have a level playing field and people do get their shot. That's important. So if everyone gets a shot and we get to see real talent, those folks should have a chance to rise. And that's what I worry about in terms of the long-term vision. And I wouldn't just isolate if we looked at just Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. If we look at Howard County Public School System, if we look at the government, if we look at Howard County General Hospital, even if you look at Verizon as a private entity, you're going to say that there are still these problems that are out there that we need to address, because BIPOC is the reality. BIPOC is what we're going to have going forward, and therefore we have to address this in Howard County. Very important.
Thank you. Jansen, the same question. What challenges do you anticipate coming up in the long term that require a different approach than today?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And as I mentioned earlier, this community is at an inflection point. And some of these, some of the things I'm going to list are both short-term challenges as well as long-term challenges. Or they're things that have to be addressed in the short term that will impact how this community looks and grows in the long term. Some of those things being every 10 years after the census, there is a general plan update, and the current GPU is called Local by Design. And one of the focuses there is to touch on, areas of equity, touch on the reality that the housing affordability issues have gone. Their housing affordability is one of the biggest issues when it comes to access to home ownership. And this general plan update, it will require boldness. It will require boldness to follow through on some of those things. And after a general plan update is approved, then enter AFFO, Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance. And we have to figure out, how do we balance, infrastructure capacity with ensuring that we have economic development as well as opportunity. And following into that is downtown Columbia's continued expansion. And so those are just some of the long-term things that will, that when I'm at the doors, I always tell people everything is connected. When you're looking at how housing and development, redevelopment, how it connects with protecting green spaces. These are all things that it can't just be like, hey, we want a one one-shot approach. We cannot keep looking back saying, hey, this is not how Howard County looked in the 80s and the 90s. This has not made Columbia great again. We are at a point where Columbia has changed so dramatically and is on the verge of becoming a real city. We have to push forward and do it in a way that honors the past. Thank you. I got you.
Thank you. And actually, this is a great segue into really digging deeper and moving into the general plan. And so, Jensen, we're going to start with you on this one. And so, you touched on it. Once each decade, the Howard County updates its general plan, which again is a long-range visionary document that guides land use, growth, development decisions. So, in your opinion, what should this document prioritize as it relates to neighborhoods, employment centers, and overall planning themes?
I'm sorry, I was muted. So first, by way of background, I'm a graduate of the Howard County's of Department of Planning and Zoning's Plan Howard Academy. I also served as a village representative on the Columbia Association's Visioning Project, which was done in anticipation of the general plan update. So part of their priorities in their current vision or in their current document is prioritizing socioeconomic diversity, which is something that Columbia at least and was founded on. And it's something that we have drifted away from. So we have to be very intentional about prioritizing socioeconomic diversity with respect to housing stock. They are focused on prioritizing green and open spaces, which, as I mentioned earlier, that is one of my biggest things. And I believe that the way we do that is to not just say, let's not build. The way we do that is to focus on transit-oriented development. And that's just honestly, that's just a fancy term to say, how have cities throughout all of human history, how have they grown? They have grown organically in a space where you can walk to where you need to. You can walk to get food. You can walk to your business, to your job centers. And I think now many people are realizing suburban sprawl, and as great and visionary as as Jim Rouse and his goal for this new American city was, it was still based on a suburban sprawl model. So now we have to be very, very intentional and say, as we continue along with the aspirational goals of what Columbia was always supposed to be, we just need to make sure we're making it more walkable, we're making it more bikeable, we're creating spaces where people literally can live, work, eat, and play without having to get into their vehicles. So there's a way to save the environment as well as create real organic cities. So that's why I like the current approach that they're taking with regards to prioritizing the future land use map to guide development, and I'm big on redevelopment in identified activity centers. And I can say
we're gonna pause right there and come back to the redevelopment piece, just because I want to continue to be conscious of our time. But Hank, if you would please share your thoughts again as it relates to the general plan and what this document should prioritize and so forth.
Okay, well, I think the general plan is definitely a step in the right direction. So I tip my hat to Calvin Ball. And as far as the housing opportunities master plan, there are components of it looking at affordable housing, and that's going to be very important, especially since we've been so blessed in Howard County with our prices just rising. However, certain folks are getting locked out. They can't get into the market. So one of the things that's really cool in the plan on May 18th, 2021 is the Housing Opportunities Trust Fund. $5 million went into that. And that was really great. So when you start thinking about things of saying, okay, demand for housing and housing stock is really up, and therefore to combat the shortcomings to some points that were raised before, we got to revise land use. We got to look at improving our existing policies, and we also have to balance infrastructure moving forward. And the key is, I agree and concur with Jensen that the new urbanism is the way to go. That if you can live in a spot where you can walk and get to the necessary things like your food and some of the other necessary services you have, as opposed to constantly driving, you can jump on your bike. That's pretty cool. Now, I live in Mapleon, and that is a reality. And it's really cool in that regard, but not everyone has that advantage. And one of the things that we're starting to see are these developments that are done in a very productive manner, like Patuxent Commons. There, you've got to realize that right now, our reality is that if I look at the median sales price for a home in Howard County, it's north of $500,000. A one-bedroom apartment will cost you more than $1,700 a month in terms of rent. And therefore, we have to come up with more affordable housing. Now, what normally should happen, if you look at the plans for the new developments, this notion of saying that we're going to make sure we set aside 10 to 15% of housing stock for moderate income housing should be there. And there are a number of games, unfortunately, that happen where you can sort of skirt around and not build it, but we have to build it. So I'm on record saying in lieu of fees, we need to abolish that. We need to sort of hold the builders accountable, saying, look, when you build these neighborhoods, you're going to have to build this affordable housing. Why? Well, we have people who need to be in our community. They shouldn't have to commute all the way in. So if I'm a first-time home buyer, if I'm a first responder, if I'm a county employee, if I work for the Howard County Public School System, it would be nice to live where I work. And so we have to make that happen. And this notion of the Housing Opportunities Trust Fund is a great step in that direction. So it can be done. It's going to take our collective efforts to get there, but I'm very optimistic that at the end of the day, we're going to find a way to balance it. So between the needs of developers saying we want to build out these neighborhoods that we can actually make some money and be profitable, and at the same time, we can wrap our arms around good folks who get a shot at rising up the economic ladder, because why? Suddenly I have an ownership interest, and that's what it's all about. So thank you.
Thank you. And so we're going to stay here in terms of talking about land use and development, because outside of the general plan, the other document that will also be undertaking is the rewriting of zoning and land use regulations that also are going to impact the county. And so, you know, it's in some respects, these are two documents that's almost like a chicken and an egg. Do you do land use and zoning, or do you do the general plan? They both have to be done. And so with that, Hank, if you would just talk about your preparation in terms of how prepared you are to address some of the issues that are going to confront you as it relates to the rewriting of the zoning and land use policies, as well as just overall share your zoning and the land use philosophy. And as well as at the end of the day, you know, when it's set, when it's finalized, what would you hope to see come out of the process?
Okay, that's a lot to cover. All right, so here we go. Yeah. First things first, if elected, I'm
gonna give you an extra 30 seconds here. So we're gonna go 2.5.
30 seconds, hold me back.
So we're gonna go 2.5. We're gonna go 2.5 for both of you, and that'll give you more time to dig into this one.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. All right, so if I'm elected, my first priority would be to zero on that Route 1 corridor. And I think that thanks to Robert Charles Lesser and Company, that entity has pointed us in the right direction. So we have roughly a space of land that's only 8% of Howard County, but guess what? It generates 30% of our job base. And therefore, it makes sense that we are going to promote mixed use, the new urbanism that I talked about before, in terms of office space, in terms of STEM-related labs and jobs, so that we can allow that creative class to coalesce in the region. So we're definitely going to do that. A second priority is look at Snowden River Parkway area. All right. And with that, once again, we're talking about a little slither of land, less than 1% of the county, but it's going to yield 5% of our jobs. So strategically, you've got to look at those land areas where you can get the greatest return on investment. And if you do that, you're going to say that, all right, what is the next logical step? Knowledge workers. We're going to need Class A office space that combines that mixed use development. And once again, that technology, we're going to push hard. A third priority is that we really got to redouble our efforts when it comes to Route 40 corridor. And of late, we've seen a lot of demand in terms of the Columbia Village centers, to Jensen's point earlier. And this coveted space has matured, and yet we're going to find that there are opportunities to rezone that. And so we need to do that smartly. And finally, when it comes to my philosophy, when it comes to land use, I learned this one in law school. Land should not remain fallow. you got to get use out of that land. So we've got to be wise stewards, and the utilitarian approach is the way to go. What is the greatest good for the greatest number of people? And in order to pull that off, we are always going to have to be very proactive, and we're going to have to think things through. And it's not about us now. We've got to think about down the line, future generations. And if we do it right, I believe this will become a hub for STEM-related enterprises. I think we will be the envy of the nation. And that is the vision that I see for Howard County. Thanks.
Thank you. And man, I gave you some more time, and I still have some to spare. So, Jensen, we're going to turn it over to you.
All right. Oh, and just to be clear, I believe do you mind repeating the question? I want to make sure I'm hitting.
No, I don't mind, because it was certainly a mouthful. So yeah. I was commenting that just as we go through the general plan, we also have to update the land use, the rewriting of the zoning and land use regulations as well. And so just talk about one, how prepared are you to address the issues that are going to confront you in this process, and then also just share what are your zoning and land use philosophies, and then lastly, the process is done, and what do you hope to what would you hope to see as a result of the process?
Okay, well, I'll do it I'll start with three first, or the third part of the question. Yep. And the reason why I want to make sure that whoever's listening understand what my ultimate North Star is and my why. Everything that I'm going to do with respects to my work on the council, specifically as it relates to zoning and land use, which I think is the critical issue facing this community. Like, what do we become? Do we become this bedroom city that was once anchored and promised on creating this place that was supposed to be a city on a hill, or are we going to become are we going to actually live up to that? And I believe we can live up to that. So I am working to ensure that our children and that future generations, that they have climate resilient communities filled with green spaces, filled with walkability, filled with culture, filled with arts, filled with a nightlife economy, filled with all the things that come with urban centers, while maintaining that character, while maintaining that promise, while maintaining the magic that has made Columbia, has made Howard County what it is. So how prepared am I to address these issues? I would say I'm more prepared than many. I'm not going to say that I'm a zoning subject matter expert, but in my prior, I worked in Prince George's County in their Office of Law before I came to Howard County government. And in that role, I worked in government operations. Part of what I did was I dealt with a lot of administrative zoning litigation. It was my first exposure to the many issues that come with zoning. In addition, I've spent a lot of time researching this space, particularly the history of single family zoning and how other progressive jurisdictions have sought to tackle the same challenges that we're facing. They have been dealing with these challenges for decades. Because we are now growing into we're hitting like a space where growth is going to start to slow down, but how do we then accommodate all of the people that have come here and the other people that want to come here? So I'm a big fan of looking at other jurisdictions and learning from their mistakes, as well as from what they've done well. And so in my opinion, the top three issues that I see as we relate to the general plan rewriting, to the general plan update, and the following rewriting on preservation of green spaces, middle miss and housing, and ensuring that our infrastructure keeps up with community needs. And so in terms of I thought I had an extra 30 seconds.
You did. Finish your last. I'll let you finish your last sentence, or if you were in a mid thought, finish your thought.
I was. Exclusionary Euclidean zoning is responsible for the sprawl and suburban character of much of the built environment in the U.S. We need to take a strong look at that to figure out how it's caused housing discrimination, segregation, and what we can do going forward to fix that. Drop mic.
All right, so we're going to stay with you this time, and actually, because both you as well as Hank have touched on this, I think, at various moments of our conversation this morning, and that is talking about the how do we incentivize redevelopment of existing commercial properties? And so let's go there and share your thoughts in terms of, how do we do that? Whether it's the village centers or other commercial thoroughfares and so forth.
Well, for those that don't know me, I've lived and I've been in the trenches on the redevelopment of village centers. I've served for 2 years on the Hickory Ridge Village Board, which was ground zero for a lot of the discussion around redevelopment. And so I have seen firsthand when you have a small vocal minority of the population that is opposed to change, and how they will do whatever it is to hold on to vestiges of a long gone past. So I am very familiar with issues stemming around redevelopment, specifically the village center. So my plan, though, to address and incentivize the redevelopment of these existing commercial spaces, I agree with promoting compact mixed-use development in county activity centers that create spaces where people can actually do all the things that everyone says: live, work, shop, play, etc., as a real community, as a real cohesive community. I think that's the part we need to get back to. We build community that way. Mixed use development has increasingly become popular in locations that have reached maturity. Prior to Howard County, we are reaching maturity. And when done right, mixed use can further economic, environmental, and all types of sustainable metrics for a community. I would support the right incentives, including but not limited to functional density bonuses, design standards, parking standards, reduced infrastructure fees, and use of pre-approved plans. This approach will be balanced. I want to make sure you all hear me right. This approach will be balanced to ensure equitable land use policy aligns community needs and aspirations with project deliverables now and in the future. So on my website, I talk about community benefit agreements. And I think we can use that as an intellectual framework for engagement between developers, and property owners and impacted communities to ensure partnership, job creation, community input, and hyperlocal reinvestment. Like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. And while I have a couple extra seconds, I was saying, in terms of my zoning land use philosophy, I think we have to rethink how we look at exclusionary zoning, and we have to start that many other jurisdictions, including parts of Howard County, where appropriate, have gone into mixed use zones and other zoning reforms to balance out the harmful effects of exclusionary zoning. Thank you. Drop mic.
Thank you. So, Hank?
So if I've got it right, the question is, what are your plans to address and incentivize redevelopment of existing commercial properties in the county? Is that correct?
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
Okay. Well, we don't have the luxury of standing still. No one does. And therefore, I'm a staunch advocate for reasonable, sustainable growth. We're going to have to change. All right. Now, to thrive, we've got to look at any areas that look ripe for redevelopment and expand it into commercial use. Case in point, let's go back to the Route 1 corridor. It's a very promising opportunity. We can convert existing commercial enclaves into economic zones. So the idea of economic zones goes back to that vision we talked about before. It's innovation hubs for entrepreneurs. We should be able to draw that talent into Howard County. And if we do that, that will become our new norm. It'll become our new North Star, and it will be the prevailing culture in Howard County. Where will the money be made in the future? We're talking about advances in technology and science. Those are going to be the drivers. And if that's the case, if that's going to command our economic future, we have to be there. So let's start building now and plant our flag. The other thing we want to keep in mind is that if you're going to foster such an environment where it's cutting edge and it's leading edge technology, and businesses are jumping in there left and right, we will make sure that we ensure ethical standards. And at the same time, to achieve that outcome, it's got to align itself with the overall 2030 general plan. So we're not going to deviate from that. The right thing, whenever you want a system to work, is you got to incentivize the right players. And therefore, if you are about beneficial projects, things that are going to give us a yield in the long term, we're going to stand by you. And we are definitely going to promote that. So they have this notion of what they call the tiered incentive program. And I think that's what needs to be applied here in this instant. And you will then say, okay, we've tiered it. We get these benefits that are going to be commensurate with any proposed projects coming down the line. And if we do that in a smart way and keep moving in that direction, I think we're going to be fine. And there's no reason why we can't get there. Like I said, we've got everything going for us, from the notion of how pristine and wonderful the land is in terms of the integrity, in keeping with Jim Rouse's dream of overall inclusion. We'll get there. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we have just a couple more questions we're going to ask here. And so as we've been talking about development, you certainly can't talk about development and not talk about the adequate public facilities ordinance and so forth. So we're going to have a question here, and that is, so we currently have an APFO ordinance, on the books, and that's currently dictating what schools are closed and open and so forth. But we also are now at one of these, I guess, rare moments, if you will, where we've got a new high school that's going to be open. And so typically the process for APFO is to adopt charts each year in June or July. And then, depending on the scenario, make changes to as needed. But again, we've got a new high school coming forward. So the process outlined with community input, ultimately, and I'm referring to the Board of Ed process, with community input will delay the decision by the Board of Education perhaps until December or so. As such, we may have the same council, or obviously I know if you guys would have it your way, it would be one of the two of you that would be on the council. And so, so we potentially could have a new group of people making decisions on this document. So my question is, would you support revisiting the open closed chart as soon as the redistricting plan for 2023 is adopted by the Board of Education, rather than waiting until, say, July of 2023? So we'll start with you, Hank.
Okay, well, let's act now. We have an ongoing project. Construction has already begun. It's about 45% of the way complete. So let's not slow this thing down. The longer we delay, it just means more costs. And what's intriguing about this High School 13, it's going to be on Mission Road in good old Jessup, Maryland. We need it. Okay, we're going to be able to accommodate 1,650 students. It is something that's certainly needed. Nearby, you have Howard High, where they're almost at 2,000 kids. So we've got to address the overcapacity issues. And so what's driving that is the APFO, and it is certainly a step in the right direction. But we're talking about real money here when you look at what's the overall total project budget. The base is around $107 million. You start throwing in architect fees and construction fees and the related costs and the project contingency and the equipment and technology. And before you know it, we're talking about a budget of $135 million to build High School 13. Now, what's intriguing is the money's rolling in waves. And so far on the fiscal calendar, we've got earmarked about $35 million for this year, and the following year, 23 and 24 will come in with about another 20 million. We've put aside about 140 million in terms of the overall funding projections that we're going to need to get there. But anything that slows it down or delays it only from a business standpoint means your costs will rise. We know what it costs in terms of material and construction, and the longer you wait, those prices just simply go up. So I would say let's get smart about this. We've already tacked this course. We're going to stay on this course. Done. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. I was trying to hit mute. I was trying to hit mute on unmute on my side. But Jensen, the same question as it relates to again revisiting the open and closed chart as it relates to the thing that would take place as a result of High School 13.
Yes. No. And as you stated originally in the question, it is a very rare thing indeed to have a new high school open, and as a result, the resulting school population shifts. It has to happen sooner rather than later. But here's the thing: I also know that part of this process, and I'm not going to go into how the school board or the Board of Education necessarily, if they're always clicking on every cylinder or moving with the appropriate urgency. But I will say that while I agree that there is a much more truncated timeline that is required. While I think that needs to, the redistricting plan needs to be adopted sooner rather than later, so that people can start to plan accordingly. Because of course, once you get to that part where there's a certain level of and redistricting is something that happens. I know it's had a bad connotation in recent years here in the county, but redistricting is a natural thing that occurs on a regular basis when it needs school or what. But you want to make sure that people are aware of where their child will be going to school, so that when people are making the appropriate exceptions or exemptions based on, hey, my child is a junior, they should stay at this particular school, etc. I think the timeline has to be sped up. However, I hesitate to say that community input, and as much as I've seen how certain community input can just be something that slows down progress because the people that are opposed, they just have the loudest voices. I still believe that we still need we need a period. We need some way to make sure that community input has occurred, but in a way that does not delay the decision until December. Because above all things, we need to have that information out so people can start planning for the next school year.
Thank you. And Jansen, since we started with Hank, we're going to wrap up with you going first.
Okay.
And this question is, if elected, what do you envision being your most significant accomplishments? If elected, what do you envision being your most significant accomplishment, during your 4-year term if you were to be elected?
Okay, great question. Is this the last question, by the way?
This would be the last question. Yes.
Okay. I don't know if you had the opportunity of closing remarks. So if not, I'll make this my closing remarks as well.
Yes.
Okay. So prior to 2018, District 4 had 16 years of strong, forward-thinking leadership that knew that completing the foundational vision of a thriving downtown Columbia would become an engine that would benefit all: the residents, businesses, tourism, and the arts. On the council, I will bring back that forward-thinking approach that allows Howard County to imagine differently instead of reacting negatively to the hard decisions and opportunities that our growing community has to make. Hank talked earlier about the Housing Opportunity Masters Trust. I would not be in Annapolis testifying against it. I would not be trying to file amendments to send it to contingency as the incumbent council member has. So again, we've had 16 years of that strong level of vision, which is why I'm proud to say that both of those former council members, Mary Kay Siggety, who served for 12 years, along with Ken Ullman, they have both endorsed me. In fact, sitting council member Dr. Opal Jones has also endorsed me. But in terms of what will be my most significant accomplishment, and it's the primary reason I came into this race, again, missing middle housing. It is tied to many of the issues facing this community. I understand that more housing is needed, including in this district, to reduce housing cost inflation, balance and create and focus on speeding up job creation, to reduce commute times, and improve access to housing that aligns with this area's foundational purpose. Otherwise, housing prices will continue to keep out all but the highest earners, stopping the necessary balance of young professionals and older residents necessary for a thriving, healthy learning community. And again, I believe the GPU update, or the GPU HOCO by design, which should be a roadmap to how this community would evolve, that is the singular biggest issue that has to be addressed in these 4 years. So there'll be everything I will do will be focused towards ensuring that all, including our business community, have an equitable path forward. But I believe that will be the general plan update and the resultant APFO, the resultant land use regulations rewrites. Those things are all critical. Thank you.
Thank you. And Hank.
I got into this race, as I said initially, because a wrong was done to my daughter. And if you get to know Gigi, if you got to meet my daughter, she is the apple of my eye and the delight of my heart. And as a father, you want safe and conducive learning environments. Schools have to be that. And it's not going to be tolerated anymore going forward. This issue of racism and discrimination and the like, we got to put this to bed. We have to move forward as a nation. We will be a more perfect union. we can get there. Now, it seems like these days that there's a lot in the popular press, and this incident happened and that incident happened. But I feel that for the next generation, if we raise them right, we can move ahead and get beyond this. And therefore, that's what brought me into this, understanding that we have to make sure that next generation has the right education, especially in the STEM fields, that they're going to be ready as knowledge workers for these jobs that we're going to create thanks to the technology and science down the line. And of course, at the same time, once we address that, for existing entities that are out there, I want to make sure that diversity and inclusion isn't just a phrase. It isn't something that's nice to say around the water cooler. It's something you're implementing. So that would be another accomplishment where I'm going to really try to spur and push and nudge and whatever it takes to get businesses to say, look, it's time to walk the walk. It's time to put in those mechanisms so you will suddenly be accountable to the public. And when they look to your leadership and what you're about, they're going to see underrepresented minorities in leadership roles. And it is the new day that we're looking for in this country. So that's what I see, the tremendous power base that the council represents. You can draft the laws, you can give teeth to those laws, and you can change where we're headed. And it is only inevitable. It's just simply looking at the numbers. If you look at the shift in the demographic patterns, we've already said that Howard County has become minority majority. And as we keep marching forward as a nation, the entire country will be that way. Therefore, we have to do those things that make sense to get us back to, once again, that more perfect union where everyone who has talent gets a chance to rise. And that's what it's all about. And of course, a great vehicle to get it done is business. And so I thank the Howard County Chamber of Commerce for having this forum. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you to you both. One for joining me this morning, but also thank you both for agreeing to step into public service. Certainly, anyone that runs for elected office and then that's subsequently elected is making great sacrifices, whether it be of their personal time, of time that could be spent with family, friends, even sometimes to the detriment of maybe business opportunities. So thank you to you both for your decision to serve Howard County. So just a few closing comments before we wrap things up this morning. The first thing is we touched on really, I guess, what amounts to maybe a handful of the questions that these two gentlemen were able to answer for us at the chamber. And so if you actually visit the chamber website, which is, again, howardchamber.com, and while there, you'll see a tab that says news. And then underneath the news tab, there's one that says chamber. And you will see the candidate questionnaires for council that we have posted, particularly for those candidates that have elected to respond and share their thoughts in writing for the public to see. And so you'll have an opportunity to see in writing many of the things that both Hank and Jensen has verbalized this morning, as well as their thoughts on things that we just didn't get around to answering. So again, it's on the Howard Chamber website under the news section. The other thing is we're going into that time of early voting. And so while on the one hand, the election is actually July 19th, at the same time, for those of you that have already made your decision and would like to vote early voting actually starts July 7th through the 14th, and it will go from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And so anyone that's registered to vote can register early here in the county. And there are, I think, 5 early voting centers throughout the county. And so when you go to vote, you'll need to, of course, bring a document that proves where you live, which can be a license, an ID card, change of address card, pay stub, etc. But want to just put that public announcement out there. And those early voting centers just quickly are Reservoir High School, Wild Lake High School, Howard High School, Marriott's Ridge, and Long Beach High School. And so, again, I thank you all for joining us this morning. Also, we'll be back with one more Coffee and Candidates before the election, where we're going to turn our attention off of the council next week and turn it to the General Assembly. And we're going to have candidates for Legislative District 13 to join us. And so see you next week at 8 o'clock. Thank you.